welcome to another edition of the TRC Podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 2. My name is Jake, and I am your host. With me is my friend and statistician savant, Ryan, from RJM Analytics, our part-time third musketeer, Adam, and joining us for his third visit to the hot seat is David. Last week, of course, we did our season preview, but unfortunately, it was a little bit ragged, which I'm mostly to blame for. And there's a lot of things we didn't cover, even some pretty obvious ones, and we'll try to account for that this week. So you can basically consider this a part 2 of our season preview. And of course, we'll obviously talk about the big race, the biggest one we have, the 65th Daytona 500, and maybe a little bit about the other sort of frustrating events that we had over the course of the week. But I think we should begin with the week or day that was in Cup. What do you guys want to do? Do you just want to go over Speed Week cumulatively, or just go straight to Sunday?
Guess we'll just kind of start with Sunday.
Okay, I'll let you guys have at it then.
I mean, I thought it was about as good as you can ask for in terms of a Daytona 500 in this day and age. Everybody lose your brains and crash the whole field in the last 10 laps or so, which I guess makes it fitting that guy who's sort of everybody's favorite punchline for causing a bunch of stupid crashes actually drove a really clean race and won. Guess I would probably say it was, in spite of the ending, probably still the best 500 I've seen since, I guess, 2014, which was the last one that I would consider great. Obviously, I'm partially biased there, but it just seems like around that point is when, after that, every race is either a snoozer or a crash fest and no in between. But I thought, there's lots of action throughout the whole thing in this one and no real single file. And, there were a couple of crashes, but it wasn't, at the very least, it wasn't we had in 2021 where, it's a third of the field wiped out 20 laps in, and then the rest of the race is just single file except for the last laps of the stages. So, guess, like I said, about as good as you can ask for.
When we ran the first 10 laps, at least, still in double file and still basically how they started for the first 10 or so rows, you knew that this was going to be something different, something special. And I wouldn't say it's the best 500 I've ever seen. Of course, I don't recall all the details of the ones I have seen. And I'm generally pretty lenient towards races that others consider not so good. But this was without a doubt the best 500 in quite a while. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, the whole thing, even with the ending sort of dragging it down. I would say up until Daniel Suarez spun, it was about a 9 out of 10. And then the ensuing chaos, which seems to be inevitable, and especially Daytona races of late, brought it down to an 8 overall. But so I'm still being generous to it. But it was very much a good race, and I liked it. I thought the competition was good. I thought there was a lot. I thought it was clean for the most part, as it has been mentioned. And I can't ask for much more. The one thing I would just say is, one of these years it'd be really nice to get not overtime. It's funny because this race, this edition of the 500 was the longest in terms of laps run and miles completed in history, which would seem to imply that it was more of a wreck fest than it was. But regardless of all those factoids, I enjoyed the race. It was a good one, and Ricky Stenhouse drove a good race, and he's Daytona 500 champion, and good for him.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan and David. This is probably, in terms of on-track action, the best 500 since 2014, maybe 2019. Well, the first 190 laps of 2019 are pretty close. But, it was really cool to see strategies play out in the first two stages and to see clean racing go with it. We haven't often seen that in the 500 recently, so that was really cool. I guess I do wish a third lane could have formed a little bit better, but that's a minor complaint, and I'd rather have 2 lanes of clean racing than 3 lanes of a wreck fest. So I'm not going to complain too much about that. The ending, I mean, like David, I'm really tired of these overtime finishes, especially overtimes that end in a last lap crash. It's just, I think it makes the racing seem less legitimate, especially in the Daytona 500, where, this is the one night a year where we're going to get a lot of casual fans watching. The only time they'll ever get exposed to NASCAR, and it's like, that's what they see. So, yeah, it was overall, I give it an 8 out of 10, and it's certainly been better than a lot of 500s recently, but it wasn't perfect. But overall, I was very happy with it.
I pretty much.
That,
Sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead first.
All right. Okay. I have pretty much the exact same thoughts that you have, probably most similar to David. It was a really good race, as usual. Well, I won't say as usual, but it was a really, really good race that I would probably give a 9 up until, like, lap 190. And then we got the usual kind of devolvement into the circus that we usually see, but it wasn't as bad as it has been in most of the recent years, so I can give it credit for that. And I certainly enjoyed the way this race just flowed. It felt very natural through much of it, and there was enough action to keep you interested, but it didn't really feel like it dragged. Like, it seemed like the first 3 quarters of this race just flew by. This was the longest start to a Daytona 500 without an incident since 1998. I believe we went until lap 117 before we had an incident. And then even at the end, there were some crashes that we had that were avoidable and were unfortunate, but at this point, kind of like Ryan said, you pretty much have to expect it. It's inevitable. You're naive to think it's not going to happen, and so I'm pretty much just used to it at this point. But it was a really good race, definitely the best, as you guys have said, since 2014 for me. And, I mean, I have to take off some for the end, because I still would like to have a more natural finish and not have it become that kind of chaos at the end. But I would still give it, as David said, an 8, which is by far the highest rating I would have given a 500 in at least, 6 or 7 years. I started rating these races 3 years ago, but if I was going to give a rating going back, it'd be the highest one in 9 years. And the winner, it was one that was fairly deserved. After 3, 4, possibly even 6, 7 years of having winners that were, at the very least, sort of cheesy, and at the worst, just absolutely not deserving at all, we finally had a winner that pretty much earned it. I still would have preferred, I think, Kyle to have won it at the end, and it just ended under caution, as he kind of said. But Ricky Stenhouse made not 1, but 2 very courageous 3-wide passes to take the lead. And do it. He done them both on track, under green flag conditions, and he probably would have won the race even if it had not been for the wreck at the end and had the caution anyways. So I'm fine with it. We'll talk more about him specifically, I guess, in a little bit. But yeah, I'm about as happy as I think you could reasonably expect for a Daytona 500 in these times.
I think I really loved the whole first stage where it went totally green from start to finish. I'm always gonna pine for my 2000s Daytona before the repave, when you could move around and run your own lane and move through the field on your own. But this is about, and the cars would really get spread out. This was, though, about as close as you could get to that, and it really brought back a lot of those memories of, those late 2000s Daytona 500s that I look at with such rose-colored glasses where, the first 150 laps or so would be pain, calm before the storm type of thing, and then you would really see the intensity pick up later, and you just see the whole complexion of the race change. Once it got down to crunch time, that I think a lot of this has been taken out, with stage racing and just the way guys drive now. But yeah, as far as that goes, this was about as close as we can get to that. I guess with the ending, I was going to kind of piggyback off of something Adam said, which is, if we're going to have these overtimes, which I'm in full support of, I think, obviously they get a bit, crash festy, but if we're going to have overtime, we have to figure out a way to just make it so that races can't end under caution, because that's the whole point of overtime. I get it, it's a risk of tearing up more cars, but it's supposed to be just the whole point of adding extra laps so that fans can get a green flag finish, and especially so that casual fans just tuning in for the first time, they shouldn't have the race be decided by whenever NASCAR throws the magic button. Somebody on Twitter, actually a couple people on Twitter saw suggesting something like NASCAR add like maybe a line on the backstretch that they can race to if there's a wreck in the first turn on the last lap, which I think that would be a good idea. Or also just
Didn't we just have that?
We had something sort of like that a couple years ago, but that was like, or if they would. It was like if they crashed after that line, the race was official, but if they crashed before it, they would restart again.
Yeah, what we're
NASCAR just every single time they would always like hold the caution until they passed it, which was ridiculous. But
what you're speaking of was what was called the overtime rule, where after that abomination of a race that we had at Fall in Talladega of 2015, I don't even like to say the name of that race. We try to pretend that it didn't exist. But for the next couple of years after that, they had a kind of a loose rule where there was a overtime line that they put that usually was like halfway down the backstretch or whatever, that was supposed to serve as like the threshold for when you could reach and then have the caution come out.
That's what I was just talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But for me, I'll just quickly say this. As far as like the overtime goes, I definitely get what you're saying. The point I think you're trying to make is that you either need to go all the way or not do it at all. And I can definitely get on board with that. Me personally, I was always on board with green, white checkers when they first had them and for years afterwards. But I really have to say, after all, not that this was a really bad example of it, because it wasn't, but I really have to say, just after all the races that I've seen that, in my opinion, have been at least sort of spoiled to absolutely ruined, like the 600 last year, I'm over it. I'm sorry. I'm really over it, because we've just had so many of these situations where, in my opinion, it has made the race, or how I feel about the events, worse. Now, there's some mitigating factors, I think, about it, or things that you could take into consideration that might make it better, like Sean or some of us talk about, maybe just do single file restarts on the overtime or whatever. I'm personally in favor, and I know they're not going to do it because, this is the age of entertainment and wanting to have manufactured chaos, and I get it, but I'm in favor of personally just going back to what they did in the early 2000s and just having fake red flags, and don't even have to do it all the time. Like, in situations where the race is not close, I'm totally fine with ending the race under caution, because it's not really affecting anything anyways. Like, if the leader, has a big advantage, then it's not changing the outcome of the race at all. But in races like Daytona or Talladega or whatever, which are always close at the end, and let's say you have a caution with like 5 to go or it's a big wreck, just red flag and try to get a green flag finish, but under the scheduled distance. I know that's a pretty minority opinion to have. But that's my preferred way. But yes, if we're going to have the green, white checkered, I am for just kind of trying to make a rule where you can automatically finish under green, even though it could lead to more situations like we had with the All-Star race last year, but at this point, I'm like, just pick one or the other.
Well, the other thing is, and nobody wants to hear it because everybody today wants to be a white knight on, when it comes to safety, is just let them race back to the line unless there's, unless there's like somebody trapped in a burning car. You have like a Damar Hamlin situation where somebody like literally needs CPR, waiting an extra 30 seconds to get the safety crews to the drivers is not going to impact anything at all. If you just have a wreck on the backstretch and there's cars on the backstretch, well, the leaders aren't going to be coming back there under full speed. If it's like in turn one or something, that's one thing. But if it's, I just, nobody was hurt in that crash, and even if somebody had been, it's not like they would have magically been cured by the safety guys getting there soon enough, as opposed to 30 seconds later. So, or what they could also just, like send out safety cars for that part of the track, and then just keep letting the leaders race, because they're going to be slowed down by the time they get back around there. But I don't know. It's just
One last little point.
My whole thing is, if you're going to have an entertainment product like this, which is designed to be an entertainment product and designed to get us a finish that's, a finish at the finish line, not at an arbitrary point whenever NASCAR throws the caution. Sorry, but if you're going to say that we can't do that because it's unsafe or whatever, then the whole thing is pointless. If we're going to go off about, it's too unsafe to let them race back to the line, then it might as well just be too unsafe to have the race at all. So I don't know how you do it. There's a lot of options out there. It's just ridiculous to me that in the year 2023, we don't have a way to ensure that races end under green.
Yeah, one last little point that I want to make, and then let David speak on this, is we were actually talking about the kind of thing that you were mentioning in the chat last night. And, at some point, like, yes, I mean, we're all sensitive to the safety and the aspect of it, but at some point, we have to acknowledge that even with some of the issues that we've had with this new car, these are the safest auto racing machines that there are in the world, easily. And at some point, we just have to trust that. I mean, there is a kind of an aspect of, well, you need to save the drivers from themselves, but ultimately, this is not to sound callous or uncaring, but we have not had a death in over 2 decades. We really have not had many serious injuries in that time frame either, other than some concussions that, get easily treated now, and, we have a lot more awareness of and how to treat. So, that's something that has to be taken into consideration. As one of our members was also saying, you're naive if you think that a lot of people aren't watching this with a big part of the thought process being that they're watching for the danger, for the spectacle. I mean, let's just be real. I mean, again, that sounds crude and kind of uncivilized to say, but it's true. And as you said, I can see more of that argument kind of with something like IndyCar, because those are guys on ovals especially, like, they truly are taking their lives in their hands every time they race. But with this, something like this, I pretty much agree with what you're saying. But
I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying,
David,
if you're going to have a product that's designed to be entertaining and designed to be some level of unsafe, you can't just go on and say, oh, well, we can't do this because it's unsafe. No. Make it so that fans get the finish that they deserve, or just, don't even watch. And I think it wasn't even just, I think to me, it's that all 3 races this past weekend did not end under the green flag. The truck race was being shortened. I didn't watch that much of that. I was out that night, but I heard it was a total shit show, pretty much. And then Xfinity, sort of same situation there. You just had one guy wreck. It was a bad wreck, but wasn't hurt. And if he had been, banged up a little bit, then safety car getting to him 30 seconds later wasn't going to make him any more hurt. So it's just just kind of waters down the finish, in my opinion. But like I said, very, very few complaints with the race, and I'm glad it didn't turn into even more of a shit show.
Yeah. All right, let's let David speak now.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the downer. It's just I do not think that there is just a simple solution to this problem, and I know that's everyone knows that, but although a thought does come to my mind while we were talking, and if there could be some sort of determination based on the type of track that we're racing at, and like the banking, how easily a crash would clear itself off the racetrack. Like, for example, this past weekend on Sunday, right? We have the crash. It was more or less coming out of the turns. If I'm not mistaken, haven't gone back and rewatched the incident, but right. And so in that case, if the crash happens on the 31-degree banking of Daytona International Speedway, like, cars aren't going to just stay up there, right? So there's that, and of course, if oil is being spilled, that's another situation. And of course, once you think about it, you have if it's in turn 1 as opposed to turn 3, that's if you let them race all the way to the finish line, then they have to get on the brakes a whole lot sooner. If there's still like debris or like a debris field in the turn or whatever, but like but that's Daytona. For a short track like Bristol or Martinsville, where the track could just easily be blocked, or Dover, right? That's just going to. I don't see an easy solution to the problem of just always having a green flag finish. And I say, I'm not as big a fan of overtimes as Ryan is, and but I will say, like, the entertainment side of me likes to see them, just because I do like seeing green flag finishes, but sort of the purist streak in me doesn't like to see them. But
for me, it's just made too many races worse instead of making them better.
Right, exactly. And I just think if we are going to have overtimes, we got to figure this out, because at some point they just end up causing more trouble and damage, and
that's
and
on the drivers.
Well, that's true too. That's true, of course, but
they used to do this all the time, and races didn't end like this. So you tell me what changed.
Well, the point system for one thing, but that's a whole other thing.
Sure enough, but in other news, right? In ending aside, I think we shouldn't discount the other storylines of the race that were very strong. Up until the ending kind of overshadowed them. You have Jimmy Johnson making his return.
Let's let Adam talk first. He's been
sorry.
In the chat.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so yeah, I want to just touch on the whole overtime thing. I actually agree kind of with all three of you in different respects. I think I'm honestly with Jake at this point, in that I think overtime, if I look at going back to all the time that I've been watching NASCAR, I have been more frustrated by overtime finishes than I ever was by races ending under caution. Like races like the 2002 Pepsi 400 or the 2004 Talladega race. Like, yeah, it was anticlimactic, but it still felt more legitimate, and it didn't. Whereas most of these overtime finishes that turn into crash fests, or when just restart lines determine the winner, like, that doesn't feel like a satisfying end to the race to me. It feels like throwing names out of a hat, basically. So overall, I think overtime has hurt my enjoyment of races more than it's helped it. Although, that being said, I do completely understand why people like overtime. But though, I also agree with Ryan that we should always let them race back to the line. I mean, the whole safety thing, this is what people never seem to mention, is that there has never been an injury caused by racing back to the line. Not once that I can think of in NASCAR history. Despite all the scenarios that people come up with saying that it'll be too dangerous and this and that, it never happened. And I think that when you look at the amount of cars that we crash because of these green white checker finishes, like they're way more dangerous than the old racing back to the line ever was. And I think that would be a good compromise where, yeah, like the race is going to end at its scheduled distance, but at least on the lap where the caution is thrown, let's say it's 2 laps to go, they race back to the line and we get at least a legitimate finish like that.
Yeah,
so that's how I would handle it. And yeah, and also like I will freely admit the danger definitely is part of the appeal to me. It's not the biggest part. It's not the second or third biggest part, but yeah, I mean, if these guys were racing, RC cars or iRacing, it just wouldn't be even close to the same spectacle that it is. There's just something about watching a bunch of guys, into the part at almost 200 miles an hour that it's like nothing else you can see in any sport. And that definitely is part of the appeal of it.
I think that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier with, that's what I was saying about, the whole thing is if there's a certain level of danger in it, then, you can't say that some parts of it are too dangerous, but some parts aren't, I watch it because to me it's exciting, and I just been part of my life for so long, and I, all the numbers and everything now that I'm really into, but absolutely, I mean, like, you look in the NFL for another example, that all these rules now about trying to protect the quarterback, and that I think are ridiculous, just because, everybody wants to wrap everybody in bubble wrap so that they never get hurt, but, there's a certain level of risk with playing sports, and there's always going to be that people might get hurt.
Yeah, like that reminds me of
NASCAR, that chance is actually much lower than in other sports, but it's like, you see in the NBA, you got players that, load management or whatever, they come back from these injuries. It shouldn't take anywhere near as long as it takes them to recover from, and then they're on minutes restrictions forever. It's just, you watch these sports because you want to see, these guys are supposed to be badasses, that they're supposed to embrace the level of danger that there is, and it's just part of the game or the race or whatever it is. And if you just try to take all that out, in the name of protecting these guys at all costs, it absolutely waters down the action in a way.
And the thing that going off of that is that the drivers themselves don't seem to be afraid, and they never have been. Obviously with the kind of crazy moves they make at the end of these races, they're not worried about safety. They know the risks and they're willing to take them every weekend. So if they're okay with it, then I feel like we as fans should be okay with it.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of last year, like something that upset just about all of us when it happened, of the race at the Glen last year, where it was raining really hard at the start, and they would not let the race begin while that was happening for a good while, just because, they were worried about his safety or whatever. There was a bit of running or standing water on the track, even though by the time we even got to halfway in the race, the track was pretty much completely dry. And for what it's worth, I agree that if we're going to have overtimes, that we should just race back to the line, that we should just not even really think about that anymore, but that there's always going to be somebody with like a praying mantis waiting with a clip of the 2003 Loudon race and Dale Jarrett to try to refute that. So, I'm not going to waste breath or time trying to argue that with most people. We agree with that, but getting most people on board with that is just not realistic. So, I'm not even going to waste time on it.
All right, well, let's go back to David to what you were saying about the storylines in the race now.
Yeah, no, I kind of jumped the gun on that one. But it was I wanted to mention, again, we had a number of good storylines in this race. We had I mentioned Jimmy Johnson's return to the Cup Series, which was he had a very strong run going until he got caught up in some of the late race chaos. We had Kyle Busch in his first run for RCR, and he was my pick to win going in, and he also did a very fine job. I almost thought going into the race, Oh no, I did think this. It was kind of setting up for a Kyle Busch to win because he had that storyline of wrecking in the duel with this great car that he could have we would have won the Daytona 500 with, and this would have been like the storyline where they pull out the backup car and they win with it anyway, but it was not to be. And then of course you had Travis Pastrana, who, despite getting caught up in the last crash, which ended the race, still managed an 11th place finish, which is really impressive, all things considered. And I think of course, the unfortunate part about this stuff that we're talking about, the ending, is that it overshadows these things. But yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about, a lot more to talk about than just the ending. So
Jimmy Johnson. I guess, Jake, time for you to hit the mute button. But
I won't mute it, but I'll let you guys go ahead because I've got no interest in that.
Main thing we're here to talk about is the numbers, and I was very impressed with how Jimmy Johnson looked, both from the eye test and also from numbers that I came out with. He was 9th place in TDR for 500. Chris Buescher, by the way, won, in case anybody's wondering, which I posted from my the RJM Analytics Twitter. He was his first ever TDR win and his highest score ever. I think the way that Jimmy Johnson could come back from just 2 years out of the sport, derping around an Indy car for whatever reason, and just look like his old self almost. I thought, the way I see this whole comeback for him going is, it can't do anything to hurt his legacy because, he's like 47 years old or what, and obviously did everything he's going to do. He's not going to win another championship, probably not going to win another race, but anything he does that, exceeds expectations, I think, just puts another feather in his cap, as personally, I think he's already the greatest of all time. He won 7 championships in the most competitive era ever. That seals it for me. He did it all in systems that were specifically designed so that people couldn't win the championship over and over and over again. But I just think if you add another generation of car for him, he looks competitive in it, and is exceeding expectations for his age and how long he was away and not having really any practice. That just it's just one more mark in his favor to me. And it was a very good start last weekend.
Yeah, one of my takeaways is how dominant the Ford camp continues to be on super speedways. We saw a lot of this last year, but I was thinking maybe with the new noses that everybody has this year that it would even things out. But it was clear. RFK probably had the fastest 2 cars, and then the SHR cars were really fast until they wrecked. Penske was really fast until they wrecked. It was really, really a Ford show, and I'm kind of wondering when the other manufacturers will catch up. It's kind of weird that, Chevy, Hendrick in particular, continues to put so much emphasis on qualifying in these plate races when qualifying doesn't matter at all. They didn't seem to have the same handling cars that the Fords did, and they didn't seem able to push as well as the Fords did. And it's, kind of almost brings me back to the old DEI dominance where Chevy was the best manufacturer on these super speedways for several years straight. I think that's where we're at now with Ford. And I kind of hope that ends soon because it's getting a little tiresome. But
yeah. You dig out that Brad Keselowski tweet from 2017. He said, "We're in for a rude awakening. Haven't seen NASCAR let a manufacturer be this dominant since the 70s or 80s."
But now he's silent. Now that his manufacturer is dominant.
Yeah. I sort of.
Your enthusiasm music.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just making a joke. Go for it.
Right. All right. Yeah, I sort of agree with what Adam's saying. I'm certainly kind of tired of Ford being the fastest Mostly from just a bias perspective. It's not that I care about manufacturers. Like I've said this before, and I made it clear. I couldn't care less about manufacturers or the teams themselves, but it just so happens that almost all of my favorite drivers drive Chevys, and so obviously I want Chevy to do well for that reason. But like we saw in the duels, not only do they seem to have some of the wrong emphasis points when it comes to their race cars, but they often seem to have the worst strategy. Like in the first, we're not really going to talk about the duels much because there's just a little too much to cover and get it all in this space of one episode. But that first duel, which was not very good, was pretty much the same thing as we saw last year. They just once again bungled the strategy and just put all their drivers behind and just left like one little single file pack of 7 or 8 cars to decide it at the front when it was over. And they did that again at the start of this race where, you know, I sort of agree with what you're saying. Like, I don't really understand on. It was strange to me how the Hendrick cars, how Kyle Larson and Alex Bowman's cars seemed to be very fast. Like when they were up front and they had the track position, they were able to stay up there and they had a lot of speed. And Kyle Larson was one of the few cars that seemed to be able to actually make passes even when he was put back in the field. But for some reason, the 9 and the 24 just did not seem to have the same speed. I mean, Chase was slow in practice. He willed his way to a good finish in the duel, but he really was not good in that either. And he may have ended up having a competitive race had he not gotten wrecked in the 500. But in the 115 laps or so that we saw, he never really challenged for the lead there or at the very front either. And Byron was pretty much invisible the whole time. So I'm not really sure what's up with that, if maybe Cliff and Blake Harris were better prepared with their cars. But that was kind of strange to me. But
Wait,
yeah, go ahead.
Hendrick doesn't have like that split shop thing anymore, do they?
No, which makes it even more difficult to figure out.
I don't know.
But anyways, so I think the gap is closer than it was now with the new nose from the Chevy. But yes, Ford is still the fastest. The cars that were really noticeably slower, though, were the Toyotas. Like, other than one little period where Denny, or as Ryan and I sometimes call him Dummy, was leading for a little bit, and Bell got up there for a little bit. There was a period of the race where they were up there at the front on strategy. They were just not fast at all, which makes me even more impressed with what Travis did, which I know some of it was through attrition, but if he doesn't get taken out by Almirola on the last restart, he probably finishes 8th in that race, having literally never driven a Cup car in his entire life before at the age of 39, which that's impressive. But I guess the last point I wanted to make, which was kind of going back to earlier, but ties into sort of what I was saying. The only thing I didn't really like about this race, other than what happened at the end, was I do like the fact that it was clean, but I also still kind of prefer having 3 lanes where you can kind of maneuver and have more options to actually get from the back to the front, because there was an issue in this race where if you got stuck back in traffic, it was really hard or almost impossible to make ground up. Like I said, Kyle Larson and maybe like 2 or 3 other guys were the only ones that were able to really do it consistently throughout the event. But in the end, I guess it's a worthwhile trade-off. So I guess whatever you guys want to talk about, you can say now.
I mean, should we talk about the elephant in the room with the coverage, or do you want to just not touch that?
Well, yeah, I would absolutely was intending on it.
Since the coverage, I guess, was just completely ignoring a bunch of stuff, and a commercial every 2 minutes, I think we should pay homage to that by just not talking about it.
Well, I kind of
wanted to... First, before we not talk about it, let's go to this commercial, right?
Yeah. Brought to you by Wendy's.
Yep.
Well,
let's go side by side. Yeah.
Well,
during caution.
We won't have a long discussion about it. I'll just say that I'm afraid we're in for probably an even rougher ride with that this year than we were last year, because Fox has this supposed vaunted new producer for this season, replacing the longtime Barry Landis that they've had for a long time, or like I think since the beginning, from 2001. And he pretty much said that his goal, or one of them, was to cover the races like a football game. And that's exactly what we don't need more of after we've already had an overload of that recently. And as far as the commercials go, which, to their credit, they did front load the commercials, and they had very few of them at the end, which that's better than having them all the way through, or having not many at the first end and then a lot at the end. But it was bad. I mean, I know the statistics said that it was not the worst, that there's been other races, even races from many years ago, that were worse. But you have to understand the presentation part of it is what made it feel just really claustrophobic, because it wasn't just the commercials themselves, the full screen ones. It was all the side-by-sides. It was the in-race ads, the Wendy's stuff, the car, the tech, the supposed tech stuff. It was just way too much. But I won't go on any more about that. If you guys don't want to talk about it, we won't, because there's really already probably been enough people talking about it already. So
it's just a shame that they are wasting probably the final years of Mike Joy's career with this crap, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, he deserves better than Tony Stewart and Clint Boyer being his partners.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I was going to say. Like, I
Mike
like Mike Joy, but
the Xfinity race, we had Austin Dillon up in the booth, you know, actively cheering for Austin Hill to win the race. I mean, it's enough of a conflict of interest when you have team owners up there, you know, Tony Stewart or Waltrips, whoever else, Dale Jr. even, as much as I love him, you know. But, you know, when you have a guy, you know, actively cheering for a guy in the race just because he's his teammate, you know, that's just unprofessional.
These guys, just because Ned Jarrett did it once in 1993 doesn't make it all right for everyone else. And that was obviously a much different scenario, because that was a father cheering for his son.
Did it, and
yeah,
it's just,
and yeah, but,
you know, come on.
But like everyone, like the prototype is Ned Jarrett doing it in 1993, and it's just unprofessional. And I mean, it's a conflict of interest to even have those guys up there in the first place, right? And it's a problem. It needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and that's the other issue. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, like it's just it brings this awkward tone to the broad. Like when, for example, like when a couple of the SHR cars crashed, it's like Tony Stewart. You could tell like that everybody was like waiting for him to say something or for him to be upset, but he was trying not to show it. So then it just was this awkward silence, you know, and it just brings this weird vibe to the broadcast where,
I think
we're all
favorite, and I put favorite in quotation marks there, is when Stephen Wallace in the Nationwide Series like crashed into his own teammate under caution and destroyed both their cars, and Rusty was up in the booth and he was just like, there's nothing he could do. He must have got hit by someone. It was just the most hilariously awkward broadcasting ever.
Yeah, and it's like we just don't need to put the viewer in position to have to listen to that kind of stuff. Like there's plenty of people out there who can serve in the broadcast booth that aren't team owners or are not related to the drivers in the field. Like why can't they put Jamie McMurray in there? He doesn't have any conflict of interest. Like there's plenty of people who could do it.
Yeah, and to that point, you know, like that's another like issue that I have, you know, with the announcers. I mean, you know, taste is taste, but to me, I just don't like Clint and Tony in the booth. I just don't like Tony Stewart, period, and I don't think that they're a good combination at all. And it's just a shame, because at this point with this booth that we've got, the way I see it is that, you know, Mike Joy, he was great, but he's washed up now. Clint is an idiot, and Tony's an asshole. And unfortunately, we've got Tony Stewart for at least 2 more races, probably 3 more, because I would assume that they would have him at Sonoma for the last race like they did last year. And we've got, Danica Patrick for 2 more races too. So, good Lord on
Hey,
that.
let's
Yeah,
let's
and
use
then
that as an
finally,
opportunity
well,
to
sorry, one last thing I
segue
want to
into
say
her.
on that is it's kind of like there's a whole problem at Fox with just their culture and the way they cover it, where I think Adam has mentioned it before, where they treat the races basically like a trip to the county fair. Whereas, NBC has a lot of flaws and like there's a lot of ways in which they stink too, but they at least take the sport seriously. Fox does not really seem to have a lot of reverence for it as a sport. It's like just a sideshow to them.
Well, since you just mentioned the GoDaddy girl, I think we'll use that as an opportunity to segue into kind of a certain ex-fling of hers, who I guess we haven't really discussed in depth on here yet.
Yeah, like I think this with Stenhouse winning the 500, I think that it brings up a good conversation about his legacy and his place in the sport. I mean, I've seen some crazy takes out there, which I'm not even going to mention, but like, where do you guys think? Where do you guys
solidifies him as at least better than all the memes? It solidifies him as a guy who deserves to have a cup career, and I guess I would say maybe slightly better than average driver in the right situation. When he wants to be. Does feel like a lot of times with him, he just has these flashes, but then it's like he disappears for a couple months. But,
yeah. Certainly better than last two winners.
Yeah.
Yes, no doubt.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess like I see it as he's probably slightly below average at everything except super speedway racing, but then he's probably a top 5 super speedway racer, maybe of his generation. Maybe that's a little strong, but I feel like he has been beyond the 3 races he's won. He's consistently been up at the front in these races, no matter which car he's driving, and even when he doesn't have any teammates. So I think that's a testament to his skill in drafting. I mean, he has caused a lot of wrecks, and he does a lot of stupid things. But yeah, I think outside of speedways in Bristol, he's definitely a below average driver. I mean, he hasn't really done a whole lot other than a few random good runs, like one run at Dover, one run at Kansas. Like, he's just kind of meh outside of his one specialty.
Yeah,
I mean, he's good for where he's driving. Like, JTG Dotery is not a top tier organization, and so they don't. It's not like they've got a top tier driver driving for them. And I think he's fine where he is, and he's. I'm glad that he was. I mean, in a sense, I'm glad that he won this race driving for JTG rather than Roush, right? Because he might still be there, right? And I guess, yeah.
I guess,
go on.
I think there's been like a rumor that now is heating up about him potentially being Harvick's replacement next year.
I mean,
I have no idea.
He is. He works or he's under Harvick's scouting agency, right?
Yeah.
So who
Yeah,
knows?
he's
But
represented by Harvick, I think, which is the same reason Priest is there. So
yeah,
guess.
But I agree with you, David, that I think JTG is the perfect team for him. I feel like his skill level matches their funding and equipment level. And yeah, like I certainly was. Honestly, I was among the drivers who were left at the end. I was kind of rooting for him, and I was rooting for JTG just because it's cool to see a small team win who really needed it. If he had won for SHR, say, it would not have been as good of a feeling.
Yeah, for me, like as far as like legacy goes or whatever, I pretty much consider him like just like chaotic average, if there's such a thing. Like if Chris Buescher, like in my opinion, is probably the most average driver in the field, but in a very low-key way, Stenhouse would be like the chaotic version of that. And like he has, I think, the potential and always did to be like probably about a 15th place driver, with us at his ceiling and maybe, have some really fast races here if he was in the right equipment and he had the motivation. But which he hasn't necessarily earned it, never really got that kind of shot where he was just in the premium equipment to do that. And also, I kind of think that he's one of these drivers that he kind of doesn't always give his best effort. Like, if he's fast off the truck, you'll see him show some speed in the race and maybe contend. But if he's not, he'll just kind of run in 20th and 25th, and you'll never hear about him at most tracks. But obviously, he has and always has had a gift for super speedway racing. It was apparent very early on. He had the 2 wins at Talladega, and he's been up at the front contending in several other races. In this race, it's kind of easy to forget, but this was pretty much, you could say, redemption for last year, because I remember it was one of the few times that, we as a community collectively felt sorry for him, because he was up at the front and really contending in last year's 500, and he got taken out by a wreck that wasn't of his own doing. And so you could say it's nice redemption for him. And, like I said, he drove a smart, methodical, clean race. He wasn't up there in the early and middle parts of the race, but he took advantage when the opportunity presented itself at the end, and that's all you can really ask for. And I kind of felt a little bit bad for him because of the fact that, even if he did bring it on himself, that his legacy kind of has become that of the mean and like that 2018 July Daytona race and Stenhouse DD and all that, and that he only had those 2 wins early and never really got that opportunity in a great ride. But now I think pretty much, it's basically like a confirmation of everything that he has been a driver and everything that he will be. Like, I'd be happy to just see him right off into the sunset now, because I think he's been vindicated for what he is as a driver.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think what was interesting to me is, usually in these super speedway races, he contends throughout the whole race until he wrecks. But drove a very smart, methodical race this time. People were even Herb, who was on here last week, was pointing out early in the race, he's been totally invisible. I think there was one point in the race where he was running dead last in the first stage, and then I think he had a speeding penalty late in the race.
Yeah, he did. Kyle Busch had one too.
Yeah. So it was he had to come back from that, and he had the highest pass differential of anybody in the race. A lot of that being because he started so deep in the field, but he made those passes on his own, and credit to him for being up there when it counted. So, even if this is just a one-time thing, I definitely, like I said, I think it really helps redeem a lot of the memes about him, even if they were deserved at the time. And yeah, I guess what I was kind of trying to say earlier, though, about possibly it's Stewart-Haas next year, I mean, obviously being probably the one guy left on the planet who still believes in Cole Custer, I'd like to have him in that car, but, best case scenario is Almirola retires or goes away or whatever, and in that case, I would definitely be okay with Stenhouse and Custer both moving up to replace Almirola and Harvick, just as long as we don't get Riley Herbst, who people are now gushing over because he got a top 10. Yeah, congratulations on being one of the 10 guys who didn't wreck.
He's got a top 10 in all 5 or 6 series or whatever, his first start.
Yeah,
whatever. Are you kidding me? Why are we talking bad about this
He's not
guy?
a very good driver. So, no. But that was all I was going to say on that.
Yeah, all right. So do you want to guys talk about, before we get into continuing our season preview or just covering what we didn't last week, do you want to talk about Xfinity?
About that we didn't talk about last week?
Well, that's what I was going to say. You want to talk about Xfinity or trucks now?
I didn't feel like we were really missing anything.
Well, I mean, I guess we can kind of skip it then. There was a little, but maybe not as much as I thought. You guys want to talk about
all the different drivers and teams that we didn't really
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
I
that's
don't
up to
think
you.
there's anything that we really missed from last week.
Yeah, I just get paranoid about those things sometimes, so, I just kind of obsess and get finicky about them. But what I was going to say is, before we move on to whatever the next topic is, you want to talk about Xfinity or trucks or any of that?
Yeah, that truck race though. I mean, I was kind of one of the more, for once I was one of the more strong opinioned ones in the server about that. And I think I was like, at least we've got the worst race of the year candidate already picked out, and maybe that was strong, putting it a little bit strongly, but I mean the racing was fine when they weren't wrecking, and when they weren't, well, there wasn't much wrecking besides as much as there was just raining, but still, from a flow perspective, easily the worst race ever seen, and I don't go out of my way to watch many truck races just because it's not usually at a convenient time for me. But man, that was one of those times where I just legitimately kind of wish I had that time back. And I hate to say that, but it's just true.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, it's interesting you say that because I watched the race on DVR later that night and was able to skip through all the rain delays and all the commercials, and I actually enjoyed what I saw because I feel like the racing when it was actually happening was pretty exciting. There was a lot of 3-wide racing. There was a lot of jostling and moving around in the pack, and they didn't even wreck that much. Like they actually, especially the end of stage 2 was like really good, and you had, I think it was Ben Rhodes made that crazy move up through the middle from like 20th to right up to the lead in a few laps. Like there was some great racing, but yeah, like the flow. If I had to watch that whole thing live, I would have turned it off after probably the second rain delay because that was what was it, 5 different rain delay cautions, I think, and
Yeah,
I mean, it was almost like the 1998 Atlanta Cup race finale that lasted like 10 hours to finish the race with all the rain delays. So yeah, I hear you, David. If I lost that live, I probably would be saying the same thing as you.
Well, the thing that made it so... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like I said, I barely saw any of it because I was out that night. So I guess I'm glad I didn't really miss much. I got back like just in time to see them at the final few laps, and then the ending under caution. So
yeah, and again, like the racing was fine, just like Adam said, and it's like, but that's not the only factor that goes into like the overall quality of a race, and it's just unfortunate. I mean, it's not really any fault of the drivers for once in the truck series, but it was just not a favorable race at all in terms of weather conditions. And that's all there is to be said, like on my part.
Yeah, what was really frustrating about it was, as you kind of mentioned, from what I saw, I mean, I saw the whole race, but what I was watching when there was green flag action, which not much, it was actually a very good race, especially by truck standards. There was a lot of 2x2, a lot of moving back and forth to the field. You could actually maneuver up and down. The good drivers were making their way to the front. And it was entertaining, but every time that you got any real momentum going, it'd either rain or there'd be a crash and there'd be a long yellow flag or whatever. And it was even more frustrating because, I actually, this truck race had like the most guys that I actually liked in it in a long time. Obviously, my boy Corey LaJoie was running in it. I got to have the thrill of seeing him lead for, I think it was 19 laps. I think he tied for the most laps led, actually. And Carson Hocevar, Travis Pastrana. Let's see, what was that was one of the other guys that was part-time that was in it. Oh, Parker Kligerman, and so it made it frustrating that we were actually having a good race and it just kept getting derailed. But the biggest bad part of it, of all, was when it rained with, I think, 15 or 20 to go. And then they actually, I'll give NASCAR credit, they went to the trouble of actually trying to put every effort they could in to run the whole race. We had like a 45, 50-minute rain delay where they dried basically the whole track from being pretty wet to dry. They go out there, and then it rains again. And then the race finally ends. Like, literally 50 minutes of drying the track to get it all the way dry, ready to race for nothing. Like, that was the biggest cock tease that you could ask for. Just, but it is what it is, so.
Xfinity, I guess, not really. It was a decent race, but not the most eventful, I guess, until the end, which I've already talked about.
Relatively unremarkable, but it was fine.
Yeah. I was.
Yeah, I mean, I actually thought it was pretty good racing throughout, better than it usually is in Xfinity. I mean, the ending was like, I don't know. It was exciting having all those cars bunched up together like that, fighting for the win. But I think we all kind of knew that somebody would wreck and it would end under caution. It just seemed inevitable, and of course, it did. And I mean, it was. I don't know. It's kind of anticlimactic when it takes that long for them to, go back and look at the video, and it's like you're just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting, and
to the point where like the cars are stopped on the front stretch because they haven't. That was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. They just had the cars stopped. Well, I mean, that's partly it was because of where the wreck happened, I think. But yeah, it was definitely anticlimactic. But go on.
Yeah, no, it almost looked like they red flagged it after the checkered flag, like waiting for the results to come. It was very weird. I've never seen that either.
It was like waiting for waiting for a disputed like touchdown call in a football game or something. Like while the referees are exactly. It was that's the vibe I got from it right at the time, and that's how I feel.
Yep. I guess the one positive I'll say about it is at least Mayer didn't go into the catch fence like Myatt Snyder did last year, and instead just kind of had a slow, harmless-looking rollover that then just flipped back over once he got in the grass. But it could have been a lot worse.
It was
not very happy Austin Hill won. None of us really are big fans of him after certain antics of his, but at least it prepared him well for racing in the 500 on Sunday. Oh wait, never mind, he DNQ'd.
He was out raced or out qualified by Connor Daly for the money team.
The money team.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't Hill's fault, but we can blame him anyway because we don't like him.
Yeah. As far as my thoughts on the race, like it was decent, like nothing special, but not bad either. Like if the criticism I would have of it before the ending was that field in Xfinity, it's already kind of unequal, but it's especially unequal in the super speedways. Like it was just clear that, like the RCR cars and the JRM cars were just way, way faster than everybody else. I mean, it was insane how much faster, like it seemed Austin Hill and Justin Allgaier's car were than everyone else. And so that kind of put a little bit of a damper on it, but it was still fine. As far as the end, I don't really have much to say about that because you guys, I'm probably more scorched earth on Austin Hill than anybody else even is here. But, I have to give him credit on an objective level because, unfortunately, he is a very good super speedway driver, at least at this level. And he takes advantage of the fact that he has really fast cars, and you can't hold that against him. But let's just say I would have really preferred not to have him up there screaming up into the crowd like an ape in there. Like, there was one guy that did it in the ARCA race earlier that day that did it a lot better. So you can't really talk what that guy did. But it is, again, what it is. And, hopefully Sheldon Creed will give him a good once-over in the non-super speedway races, but we'll just have to see how it develops.
Guess, should we move on to next week at this point, or is there anything else?
Well, I wanted to ask you.
I think we should just talk about Fontana. Yeah.
Well, I did want to ask you, is there any kind of, in your analytics, you only really kind of mentioned Jimmy and Ricky. Is there anything else you want to talk about on that?
I mean, I posted everything on Twitter, so if there's anything like that, it's very hard to, draw conclusions about the plate races or the super speedway, whatever they are.
Yeah. I just kind of
Like,
just go off the eye test.
especially like where the fastest laps and all that is concerned. I mean, Cody Ware had the most fastest laps in the race. Like, that's supposed to mean anything at all?
Yes, because he's
Like,
a he's a go to goats.
Yeah, it's just very hard to really form any takeaways. Next week, I think we'll probably, or no, we're not going to have an episode next week, more than likely. But
It's just more confirmation that Cody Ware's the goat. In seriousness,
yeah, sure. You take that moral victory however you can. Just the same way Riley Herbst's 5 different fans are celebrating him getting a 10th place finish just by process of elimination. So
but in seriousness, like I pretty much just completely go off the eye test for that. Like I don't even really think or look about the metrics when it comes to super speedway races. I think it's most valuable at intermediate tracks. I think it sort of means something at short tracks, but not as much. I would say a race like this or maybe Vegas the week after is probably where I give it the most credence.
Yeah, I think assuming we have a show 2 weeks from now after Vegas, that'll definitely be a good time to talk about some early season analytical takeaways and whatnot. Even by then things, aren't going to be taking form yet in terms of who's going to be the best driver this year. Usually takes until about 8 to 10 races in, I think, before you can get a really good gauge of that. And I've also been playing around with my projections and all that, and that's, I think there's a certain point in the season where it goes from, it's all kind of based on what was predicted at the start of the year. Those guys are all at the top, and then there's a certain point in the year where it kind of transitions into, okay, now these guys who are at the top are the guys are going to be there for the rest of this year. I think that's usually about a quarter of the way into the season. So, it's always interesting to watch how those trends sort of develop and all that stuff. So we'll have more to say on that after Vegas.
Well, as far as Fontana goes, I'm really excited for it. Frankly, I'm more excited for Fontana than I was for the 500 because, it's the first real test of seeing what all the teams have in the new season. And, last year's Fontana race was absolutely one of the best races of the year. And I see no reason to think it'll be any different this year. I think we'll see a lot of comers and goers. I think we'll see a lot of tire fall off and crazy restarts. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I don't really have a good feel of who's going to have speed this week. I think it's just going to be so different with all the new aerodynamic changes and, a whole off season to work on all this stuff. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, without a doubt, it's going to be a good race. I think Fontana has just been on another level these past few years, especially since the new car. I'll be looking at it with a little bit of melancholy because they've clearly the Southern California market does not appreciate a 2-mile racetrack as much as we do, and it's going to be. I don't know how the current plans on that project are going, but they've certainly been marketing this as the last Fontana race on the 2-mile track, and I don't know what they're going to turn the racetrack into, but it's just not going to be the same. But I'm going to enjoy it while it lasts. I will say that.
As far as what I'm expecting, I guess racing-wise, maybe not quite the same sort of total unpredictability that we had last year when it was the first, regular race with the Gen 7. But I think, just Fontana in general always has those really, really spread out restarts. Gets really wide, just lots of opportunity for guys kind of ping-ponging through the field. As far as my prediction to win the race, I think I'm going to go with Tyler Reddick. I think he's just going to make a big statement that he's officially one of the elite guys, that he has equipment that he think will be elite this year and was really good on the intermediates last year. So he was in this race last year, was dominating before he blew a tire. So I think he kind of picks up where he left off there. and gets his first of what will be many wins this year.
Yeah. I think that kind of like Ryan said, I don't think it'll be as good as last year's race. Like as I kind of said last week, I don't expect the intermediates to be quite as good this year as they were last. Now the teams have had a bit more time to adjust, but I still think they'll be good and solid. And I think this will probably be a cleaner race as well, because as I said, like this race was like a microcosm of the first half of last season, where there was just so much chaos, and wrecking and incidents and wild restarts. But by the time we got to the chase, there was not nearly as much of that, and the playoffs were actually very, very clean. Outside of like car parts failures, when it came to wrecks, there were very, very few incidents last year in the playoffs. It'll probably not be that quiet, but maybe somewhere in between. But I'm looking forward to it. I think I'm probably looking forward to Vegas more. I think this year that will probably be the better race, but I could be wrong about that. I'm not going to really look at it too much as a gauge of who's going to continue to be good throughout the year, just because it's a pretty unique track. It's not really another one exactly like it. It's got the worn surface, and it's fairly flat and really wide. Not like any other track exactly on the schedule now. But as far as who I think is going to do well, I mean, there's no real great way to say it, because this is the first real kind of test that we kind of had on a normal quote-unquote racetrack to actually see who's really fast, who's done the best work over the off-season, because we had the Clash, which is just basically a joker event on a quarter-mile track that you can barely race on, and then we had this super speedway drafting race. And so I tend to agree with what Ryan is saying, that I think Tyler Reddick will be one of the best drivers, but it's hard for me to say who's actually going to contend and who will be the best, because we just don't know who's going to have the fastest cars. Last year, it was very turbulent when it came to who was the fastest, like what team was the fastest, what manufacturer. Like it would switch constantly. Like every few weeks, it would seem to shift, and it went in cycles almost. So I can't really give a good guesstimate on that, but you can always usually count on the Hendrick cars being pretty good. And if I had to pick one guy to win, I would say probably William Byron. I just feel like he's kind of due after having a lot of bad luck last year, as well as a lot of lackluster races after his 2 wins he got early last year. I kind of feel like he's going to be very hungry to get back on track and prove that he's a real contender this year. I kind of get like 2021 Homestead vibes, where that was the second race of that year, and he won that. It was the best race of his career. This is a similar kind of racetrack, similar kind of style. So I'm kind of feeling him, but there's nobody that I think is really just a solid lock pick.
And I want to just go quickly back to what David was saying about this probably being the last track on the current configuration. Like, I'm also sad about it because it's been so amazing the last 5 years or so, but I'm also at peace with it, because I think that if they weren't going to reconfigure it into a short track, if they just repaved it the way it is now, it would probably not be a very good track anymore. I mean, we saw how bad Michigan was when they repaved it. We saw how bad, Charlotte was when they repaved it. Like, these intermediate tracks do not race well with fresh pavement. So I think, it needed to happen soon anyway, so they might as well switch to a configuration that will be better in the long run. So in that sense, I guess I'm reluctantly okay with it.
That seems fair, and yeah, I think, like I said, I'll just enjoy what's left of Fontana, and I'm just kind of curious, because at this point, it seems like the whole project is sort of in a state of flux, because the original configuration that was proposed, not the current one, obviously, but the one that was shown to the public and that was made into an iRacing track and all that, was apparently not approved. So I don't know what's the what their plans currently are. Maybe one of you guys knows, but yeah, I think it's going to be a good race, and I'm going to enjoy it. And if I had to pick a driver to win, again, there's not much to go on, but I really do think that, contrary to what I originally thought when this move was announced, that Kyle Busch is going to be pretty good this year. I won't say maybe like a force to be reckoned with on the level of like Kyle Larson in 2021 or anything like that, because this is Richard Childress Racing we're talking about. But I will say he will probably win multiple races, and I would not be surprised to see him in victory lane this weekend.
Yeah,
so.
I was going to say on that note, like obviously he had his usual kind of, dry wit, sarcastic interview that he gave after the race on Sunday. But if you listen to his radio message, like even after he got wrecked in the duel while he's leading, and then even after that pretty heartbreaking conclusion in the 500, he was very upbeat in the radio. Like I said, we're going to get him next week. We're going to get him this season. Like, you have not heard stuff like that from Kyle Busch in a long time. Like it's just been, whenever something happens, he just pretty much just kind of goes away and, wants to hide, and he just seems to lose all confidence and all belief in himself. But this year, there clearly is a spark that hasn't been there in a while. And so the more time goes on, the higher I get on him and his potential this year. I still don't think he's going to be like a top 5 driver or anything like that, but I can get more on board into buying into him.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, for whatever reason, his relationship with the JGR people had just soured over the last few years, and he really seemed checked out last year, and it's like he just didn't want to be there, and he didn't want to put any effort into the races anymore. And I think, he does really seem like a new man now, and I think he's motivated and hungry, and I'm going to say he wins 2 races this year. I don't know where, I don't know when, but I'm going to say 2. And I think he'll probably make it to the round of 8 in the playoffs. I don't know if he'll be a Final Four driver, but I think this will be the best. I mean, maybe not quite as good as Reddick was in that car last year, but pretty damn good.
Well, yeah, when you're with the same race team for 14 seasons, there's bound to be some staleness that creeps in.
I was talking about him last week. I think he's going to maybe not have a top 5 season on, in points or in regular stats, but I think I predicted him to be top 5 at TDR this year, and part of that's just because I expect him to crush Austin Dillon, but I definitely think it'll be his best season probably since 2019.
Yeah. Well, now this has turned into prognosticating Kyle Busch's season, but did we have any other picks for the race this weekend?
Adam was the only one who didn't get one.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Hendrick. I'll say Larson probably as my top pick. But I could see any of the Hendrick guys doing well.
And that leads me to, I guess, the only real point that we didn't cover last week that I kind of wanted to, that I was kind of mentioning, bringing up, was like on Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott. Like Kyle Larson said on a podcast, like Merb informed me of this during the off season, that he admitted that he was really burnt out from just all the chaos of the last 2 years, like the stuff that happened and all the fallout that happened in 2020 that we all know all about, and then the incredible recovery and redemption story he had in 2021, that, all-time great, unbelievable season that he had to win the championship. And, I guess he said he put too many things on his plate that he really didn't have the energy for and couldn't handle the stress of. And, that kind of affected his racing last year. There's kind of like a comparison, I guess, partly because of like the dirt racing background and other things, that he gets like kind of a term that kind of gets thrown around, or a comparison, is him and Tony Stewart, where like Tony Stewart, he has this mode that he can go to, or this level that he can reach where nobody can touch him, but he can only seem to reach it at certain times. And like with Tony Stewart, it was the thing where he just didn't seem to care a lot of the time. And I feel like that's kind of been kind of unfairly put on Larson some, because I don't think in his case it's a thing that he doesn't care. I think he does, but he just didn't have his best stuff last year, and he just probably wasn't in the right mindset. Plus, the competition was a lot closer with the new car. There was a lot more parity, and it was just kind of a perfect storm of things that held him back from attaining the dizzying heights that he had in 2021. But it still was not a bad season at all. He was still a top 5 driver at least. And I'm looking forward as a fan of his to seeing what he can do this year, and really hoping that he can truly return to form. And I think if he has the right luck and things go his way, I think he will, because now he's got a different mindset. He's fresher. He's not going to spend too much time running races that he shouldn't be. And I'm looking forward to that. And I think maybe a similar thing could be said for Chase. We remarked at the end of last year about how kind of he had a very, very negative attitude. He was really pissy throughout the playoffs last year, even though he'd had what was pretty much the best season, and just kind of was in a state where he was like blaming everybody else, and he wasn't in the mood. And in the last weekend at Phoenix, it looked like he wanted to be anywhere but racing for the championship. Joey Logano was bouncing off the walls like he was chomping at the bit for it, but Chase was just kind of morose. And I don't know, maybe if he had something going on in his personal life, or what it was, but it was palpable. But it seems like so far this year, like he's had, for him, a more positive attitude, and I'm looking forward to seeing him get back on track too, and having the two best drivers in the sport battling each other hard this year again.
Yeah, I can't remember if I guess that is one thing we kind of forgot to do last week. We didn't make predictions or anything for the championship or even anything in the playoffs, but Kyle Larson, I think in our game that we have going on here, just generally as a prediction, he's my title pick, or at least my pick to be the best driver this year. But I mean, yeah, we've seen with him, he sometimes will look like this total world beater, and then sometimes it's just like, come on, the meme where you're poking the guy, like, do something, it's there, and it's just not showing up for some reason. But yeah, I guess he's my pick because he's the most talented guy in the field, and I definitely want us to have, even as a Chase Elliott fan, I want to have this be a Gordon Johnson thing where you have two guys at the top of their game for a long time as teammates, and they both win multiple titles, both kind of take turns being the best driver of the year, and just kind of have that real tense but not ugly rivalry. They're friends off the track, so yeah, I guess I've gone on about that before, but it's just you want to see those guys at the top of their games.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a fool's errand to try to predict the championship just because of the format we have. But yeah, I agree that Larson is my pick to be the best driver this year. I'd probably pick Reddick second and then Elliott third. I do think Reddick at 23-11 is, they might not be quite as good as JGR proper, but they're good enough that I think he can still win 4 to 6 races this year. And I don't see any reason why he won't be wildly successful with them. So that's those are the guys I'm watching. And then, I mean, you never know with Logano. I mean, I feel like we joke about how he has the same season every year for the last 10 years. I mean, that's kind of true. So he'll probably be up there, but not a world beater. And then nobody else in the Ford camp really strikes me as having much of a shot at the championship. Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing that gives me pause on Tyler Reddick is, as I mentioned before, Toyota and their teams, they seem to be a little bit more inconsistent with their speed, like they certainly were last year, and you can't predict necessarily that they're always going to be super fast like Hendrick. And tends to be that always know they're going to be at least somewhat fast. They're pretty stable, but you just can't ever be certain about like if Toyota are going to be fast or if they are, what tracks they're going to be quick at or what. But I certainly think he's going to be borderline. I mean, absolute minimum top 5 driver this year.
Yeah, I think barring a significant adjustment period to a 23XI, which might happen. These things sort of happen. I can see Reddick doing quite well this year because look at how well he did with the significantly not as good Richard Childress Racing last year, where he popped off and had multiple wins. I'd say if this develops into a stable relationship, by all means, we could win 4-6 races like Adam was saying, and I think definitely could be a top 5 driver. Absolutely. Larson and Elliott, obviously want to see them on the top of their game, and that would be, again, like Ryan said, a Gordon Johnson situation. It'd be great to just see some stability as far as as far as them not going anywhere and staying with Hendrick long term, and they could definitely be like a legendary duo that goes down in the annals of NASCAR history. So as far as this year is concerned, I'll let you speak in a moment, Jake. It's just I'd say I think the Larson predictions are probably apt because you can't keep a guy like that down for very long, especially after that tremendous season in 2021. Elliott's going to be back on his game, without a doubt. Reddick, I've already discussed, and I mentioned Busch. He probably won't be top 5, but he'll be a contender. He'll be sort of like a dark horse pick. I feel once the chase rolls around. He might get a few wins, but he might be a little less consistent. And if I were to pick one for the title, I don't know if I made any picks over the offseason. I certainly don't remember, but yeah, maybe Larson or Elliott. I think the title will probably go back to Hendrick for sure.
Yeah, like as we kind of already discussed last week, I think that those 3 guys are pretty much the clear triumvirate or at the top of the hierarchy. It's pretty much a scrum after that for like 4th. Like there's several different guys that I think are pretty interchangeable when it comes to like that guy that could be the 4th best or the other guy that makes the Final 4 or whatever. But on a more general note, I'm going to go really far out on a limb here and say that while I still think the competition is going to be decent this year, I think there's definitely going to be someone that has 1,000 laps led this year, and probably more than one. I'm not going to say who I think exactly will be or what the final tallies will be, but I think that's definitely going to be back to being a thing this year. And as far as the championship goes, like Adam said, championship, you can't predict that because so much of it is just, like even in the chase and the playoffs itself, so much of it about is luck. You're just putting everything on what happens in a certain select few events. And then you have the 4 guys that are fortunate enough to make it. You're putting absolutely everything on one race, the winner-take-all finale that we all dislike. So I'm not going to try to predict that, but, I think it's basically Larson, Reddick, and Chase 1A, 1B, and 1C, pretty much, for who's going to be the best. There could be someone that surprises us, or could be someone that maybe steps up their game, has a faster car, or just does better as a driver this year, but I just don't really see it at this point until we have evidence to prove otherwise. I think we covered now almost all the teams now. Like we've done this show for about an hour and a half now. I guess we'll cover Trackhouse next week or critique Mickey McDowell or whatever we want to do. But that's probably all we need to do for this time.
Yeah, I'm not going to make any Final Four, set in stone predictions here. But I think if I had to pick it, who I think the 4 best drivers this year are going to be, I would definitely say Chase, Larson, Reddick, and then what the hell, Kyle Busch. I think I will put in as kind of my dark horse fourth guy there. But yeah, that's obviously not to say those are going to be the four guys in the championship race or even the four guys with the most points over the season. But we'll see how it all plays out, and there's definitely a lot of others who could end up in that picture.
Yeah, I think relative to equipment, that's certainly possible.
Yeah, I guess my pick for the fourth driver is going to be Ryan Blaney. I feel like has this weird career arc where he's like constantly knocking on the door of being like a top 3 driver, but he just never seems to quite get there. And a lot of it seems to be bad luck. I mean, I feel like he's been struck down by misfortune when he's in position to win more often than just about anybody. So I feel like if the breaks go his way, he could probably win 3 or 4 races this year and be a championship contender. But then again, he could also be, the same guy he's been, where he wins 0 or 1 races and just has a bunch of top 5s and doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, it's always kind of struck me as like sort of the same way as Carl Edwards, in that one season he could go off and be this top 2 or 3 guy like he arguably was last year, even without winning, and then other seasons it's just like you're kind of waiting for him to do stuff, and I guess sort of like a poor man's Larson in a way, but it's not so much just not caring with him as it is just kind of bad luck and breaks just not going his way. But yeah, it's really hard to kind of tell at this point who. I think you have like a clear top 2, and I'm predicting that it'll become 3 with Reddick this year in that hierarchy. And then after that, it's just a real mess of these younger guys like Blaney, Chastain, Byron, who were just kind of still waiting for them to fully hit their prime, their peak, and then other sort of washing up veterans that are on the downhill of their careers, or even not even washed up, but like Kyle Busch or Logano, who are at this point 5th place drivers, even though Logano won the championship last year. And I'm definitely excited to see how all that plays out.
Yeah, like with Blaney, I feel pretty much the same way. Like he's right there, like at that 4th, 5th best driver range, especially when he's at his best. But he did have a lot of really bad luck last year. But he also does kind of create a lot of his own luck too. Like he possibly could have won the championship last year if he hadn't hit the wall while running second at Vegas, and then downshifting when he was supposed to upshift at Homestead. If it hadn't been for that, he would have been in the final race. And while he probably wouldn't have beaten Joey, I don't feel like in that last race, he would have had a chance with those rocket ship cars that Penske had at that track. But it's just. I think he's going to probably win at least 2 races this year, just because I don't think he'll continue to have that bad of luck. But I don't see him like being as a top 3 driver breaking into that hierarchy either. Like he's in that really good but not excellent range.
All right. Well, I think our silence speaks to the fact that we're probably done for the night.
Yeah, so.
I would say so. Yeah. I think it's all of that has been said has been needed to be said, and I mean I have my opinions, but there's really I don't have much to go on at this point. I want to take some more look. Should take another look at the numbers before I run my mouth, but I think it's been a pretty good episode, all things considered, and we've had some very fruitful discussions. So
yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I definitely think this was one of our better ones.
Yeah, definitely.
It felt much better than last week to me, where we were just kind of all rusty and getting back into the thick of things, and hadn't done this for 3 months. I thought this one flowed a lot better. Yeah,
for sure. Like 5. Like it's good to have 5 people, every once in a while, and have it be festive. But that's not something I'd want to do very often. Like I might do that for like a midsummer report thing, and then again maybe at the finale. But that's not something that's ideal to do often. Like even just from 5 to 4 is a pretty big difference. It just makes everything flow better.
Yep.
But yeah, well, you guys pretty much said that that's all there is, and this show was equally as long as last week. So yeah, I would agree. We probably said everything we needed to. So I'll wrap it up then. Thank all you guys for listening. The TRC podcast is me, Jake, co-host and producer, Ryan, co-host, statistician, and our analytics guy. Be sure to follow him on Twitter at RJM Analytics, where he posts a lot more detailed versions of the stuff that we mention here and statistics. Some of it's pretty revolutionary and original stuff that really nobody else is doing, like his TDR, as well as several other things he does. He's got a blog that he posts on there fairly often with like historical stuff, so be sure to check that out. Be sure to check us out on Twitter at TRC Podcast 1. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already to our channel. And more than anything, please leave a comment. If you're watching, if there's anything you're interested in, or you want to tell us something that you want us to talk about, or whatever, or you have a suggestion, please leave us, because it helps us more than anything in the algorithm. And we're going to be off next week. But we should be back for the Vegas race. I don't know exactly what day of the week we'll do the Vegas show, or who we're going to have. Like, we've got some ideas of a couple of guys we might have on, but it's not set in stone yet. But we'll figure it out when the time gets here. And look forward to seeing you again then. But for now, until next time, thank all of you for watching.